Good day, everybody. Welcome back to the eighth episode of Tech Talks. I am Hans, your host. This is Hannah, my co-host. Hey, hi, Hannah.
Hi.
All right. So in our last episode, we had Jason Shu. He was great. Um, and today, Jason was a Salesforce engineer at Google through Virtusa, with years of experience with the Salesforce platform in his belt. It pretty much attracted a variety of clients like Facebook, Google, Amazon, and Apple that paved the way in creating successes in the Salesforce process of companies you work for. Today, we are joined by Akshay. Akshay, please introduce yourself to the audience. Hello.
Absolutely. Nice to meet all of you. I'm Akshay. I'm a software engineer at Apple, where I work on the machine learning platform, specifically our data platform. Um, yeah, I've been here for about 9 months now. I'm based in the Seattle office, though working from home as everyone these days. That's about it.
Nice to meet you, Akshay. So let's start. Hannah, take it away.
Okay. So first of all, how are you during this unprecedented time? Like, what's it like working from home?
Yeah, definitely it was weird to get used to at first, but I think overall, other than the fact that the social part of work is missing, it's mostly gone back to normal. I think I figured out the patterns for my productivity that allow me to get as much done as I usually was in the office, if not more, and hopefully contributing substantially to the team still. So overall, it's gotten back to normal, but definitely looking forward to being back in the office and back with all of my friends.
Yeah, it's definitely a learning curve for all of us. Um, I guess it's not going to be the same anymore because we're going to have to like adjust our processes right now. So yeah, it's really a learning curve. So let's get started with the talk. First question is, why did you get into software engineering in the first place? Like, what is your motivation? Who's your idol about that? And so on. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I can start answering that by answering why I learned how to program in the first place and got into computer science, which was I was first exposed to it in a physics class in high school. Towards the beginning of high school, we were asked to build physics simulations in a library in Python called VPython, and had a ton of fun doing that. Realized that it was something that I could generalize to far more things that were exciting to me, and use that to get into web development throughout high school and college. And that's what I spent a lot of my time doing. Ended up studying computer science in college, and software engineering was the clearest step out of that once I graduated.
It's cool. It's cool. In software engineering, what piques your interest? What causes you to be interested in? Because I myself I take IT, but it's not necessarily easy for me to grasp software engineering. It's kind of tedious for me, and I want to. How do you? What causes you to be able to grasp it easier at least? Which is
Yeah, I don't know if there's anything that causes me to grasp it more easily. I think the exciting part of it is the fact that you have a set of things that you want to build, and oftentimes you don't really know what that's going to entail to begin with, but it's easily mappable after some work and some precedent, some research, to a set of tasks that you can execute. And that entire process is really exciting. First off, starting with something that you know you're going to achieve, and then distilling that down to how you actually get there. And each of those things feels very rewarding if you architect each of those components such that you feel like you've actually finished something that's going to be useful to someone by the end. It feels really good, not only from your own perspective, but also from the perspective of the fact that there are going to be other people around you congratulating you for that, thanking you for it, whether it's your clients, your customers, your users, or within a team, oftentimes your teammates.
Hi. That makes total sense. Okay, that makes
Okay.
that's a right. Nice
So
perspective.
can you actually tell us about your journey of becoming a software engineer or like as a software engineer, and what were actually some challenges that you had to get past to get to where you are now?
Sure. I mean, I think there are a number of challenges that inevitably anyone faces in this journey that I mentioned earlier as well. The first of which is the curriculum that ramps up to this in high school and college can often be quite difficult, quite like rigorous in ways that is very confusing in a lot of ways. So I think the first step was certainly to get used to the fact that in most contexts where I'm going to be doing work, I'm not going to understand many of the things that I'm going to see the first time around. And so getting used to that particular context was very, very important early on, because it allowed me to then put myself in a lot of situations where I was starting from scratch and building up knowledge that allowed me to eventually contribute. And so I still feel that way with a lot of what I do. I mentioned that I work on machine learning infrastructure, so I have some idea of general software engineering. I have some idea of building data tools for machine learning. I have some idea of machine learning, but I really don't know very much as a whole compared to people who have been doing this for decades, as many people in our group, about either of those things, whether it's data systems or machine learning or infrastructure services as a whole. And so every day, putting myself in the position where, I'm going in saying there's something I'm going to learn today, there's something I don't know, and I'm going to be fine with not knowing it, is I think the most important first starting place. And what was a challenge for me, at least, adjusting to that mindset and maintaining that mindset. So that's always one thing. Another thing is certainly that I'm sure both you and many other people on this call have experienced frustration along the way. I think working on software in any capacity can get super frustrating, whether assignments in class or big projects that you do as part of a job. Sometimes they don't work out. Sometimes you'll get part of the way and then just get stuck for what seems like what might end up being weeks on end with no end in sight, no real solution, no one that really knows how to help you. And so just sort of maintaining motivation through that, I think, was the second most important challenge. And I think the third part kind of joins the two, which is, and this applies to any pursuit, but continuously being open to feedback. So in school, this was straightforward. You got grades, you got evaluations, you had clear insight into where you were and were not understanding what you were doing, and taking that and using that to enhance your own knowledge, to say, these are things I know I don't know, so therefore that's what I'm going to focus on next. Or on the other side, saying, these are the things I know well, and therefore I can easily execute on those things, is super important, both in school and in industry.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. And I think it's really important to, especially when you're getting in the field of tech, that you don't know everything. That you're supposed to be aware that you don't know everything, and that's really important, because that's what will be your learning curve as well. So yeah, very good point.
Speaking of challenges, actually, what kind of challenges excite you as a software engineer? Because there are so many things that you can do to be able to learn more. What are those challenges that push you?
Sure. This is a bit of a difficult question to answer. I think in general, the sort of the class of challenges that excite me are things that I clearly see benefiting others in their usage of the systems that I contribute to. So for example, once again in the context of what I currently do with machine learning infrastructure, I hear every day about challenges that machine learning engineering will face. And those problems are some of the most exciting problems to me, because that by solving them, not only do I clearly enable this thing that someone else that I get the chance to hear from and work with, enable them to complete the task they're trying to do, but in the end provide some exciting experience to users of Apple products. And the same goes for whatever you're working on, whether it's some piece like some app or some other piece of hardware, anything that directly impacts users. I don't know if that really answers your question, but I think things that other people will see and use and be excited about is the the class of things that I'm excited about working on, and challenges that directly enable that are the sorts of challenges that I find most exciting.
It actually really answered the question. So yeah, it's cool. It's cool. Nice to hear about that.
Okay, so you mentioned machine learning. How did you get started there?
Sure. I'm definitely no expert in the space of machine learning. I work on infrastructure, so I'm not deeply knowledgeable about modeling. But I started out by taking well, I guess the first formal introduction was a class that I took at my university in my sophomore year, which went over. It was sort of a survey course of machine learning techniques, starting from decision trees and logistic regression and linear regression, all the way through personal projects and clubs by reading papers and a couple internships, and continued being excited about it and enjoying it. So I ended up here. Yeah, I would say too, there a lot of people get a start in the space through online courses. So many people have heard of Andrew Ng's Coursera course, and his new courses in deep learning through deeplearning.ai. Those are excellent. There are some excellent courses on edX as well. I with some of my first exposure to machine learning at a much higher level was a pair of edX courses from Berkeley on scalable machine learning and basics of Spark, which were a fantastic introduction to, if nothing else, production environments for machine learning, albeit not really introducing formal techniques very well.
Okay.
No.
Yeah. Actually, myself, I'm really interested to know more about machine learning, so I'll keep that in mind. Everything that you said. So, what is it like working in Apple? Since you mentioned that you also worked in Apple, what kind of environment or culture does Apple have?
For sure. I would say, all things considered, Apple as a whole operates much like many other large companies. I think there are some differences. So, for example, Apple's functionally organized. So there isn't per se an iPhone organization and a Mac organization, but rather there's a software organization and a hardware engineering organization, hardware technology, so on. And so what that means is when you contribute to some component, it's within the entire ecosystem. It's not particularly for a given product. And so working on this ML infrastructure, while we are internal infrastructure that is abstracted away from consumers, it's exciting because it can be used for absolutely anything within what the company does, whether that's pieces of the various pieces of hardware that Apple sells, or the wide variety of software that the company also sells access to. So I think that's one unique thing. Many people hear about the secrecy at Apple, which is certainly another important component of the culture, though isn't necessarily something that that positively or negatively impacts work. What else? I think once again, in line with the functional organization, there's an incredible focus on if you join Apple, for example, as a software engineer within a specific group, your goal within the company is to be the best contributor in that function that you possibly could be. So Apple, when like the first day you join, says you come here to do your life's work, and that means that every day is focused on becoming a better software engineer in what you're doing, becoming a bigger contributor to a more reliable contributor to what you're working on, which is really exciting. And I think that's pretty similar in a lot of places, but is something that's very explicitly emphasized at Apple for sure.
All right. All right. Yeah, you mentioned secrecy. Is there any way you can say what projects you've been working on, if that's all right, on Apple?
Yeah, I mean it's basically what I mentioned, data platform for ML. We have a paper that, that outlines a lot of what we do at Sigmod/pods, So it's just called Data Platform for Machine Learning. If anyone wants to look at that, it explains what we do pretty well.
All right, okay.
Yeah. It's used as a so whether that's I mean everything that you know uses machine learning at Apple, whether camera or Siri, etc.
Oh yes, cool. I use Siri a lot, to be honest. So that's really
fantastic.
cool to hear. So yeah. Hannah?
Okay. So aside from that project, what are other projects you worked on in your life? Not necessarily in Apple, but what is one of your favorite projects that you worked on as a software engineer?
Sure. So one thing that I've been excited about recently, in part because there was a related announcement by Apple at WWDC a few weeks ago, was an internship project I had at a startup called Doppler Labs back in 2017. So the relevance to the announcement was that this announcement at DubDub was about spatial audio in the AirPods Pro, and that was one of the focuses of what the startup was working on. My somewhat related project was we were applying deep learning to audio scene classification. And so we built this binary classifier ensemble using autoencoders to identify what environment users of our headphones were in, whether it was restaurants or on a bus or in the subway or in an office. And then we would automatically apply different filters based on that. To filter out known disturbances in those environments. So, for example, if you're on the bus, we'd specifically filter out the frequent the range on which engine noises usually appear. Versus on the subway, there's a different frequency range on which the like subway noises appear. And so that had been this really exciting thing where it was a pretty novel technique that we were applying. We were attempting to generalize our ensemble of binary classifiers to these multi-class CNNs on small representations of audio. So like filtered MFCCs or spectrograms, and then run that inference in relatively real time on board a phone, which was difficult to figure out, but was a super exciting opportunity to read tons of papers about how different people were starting to think about this problem, or at least components of the problem, and then build something that actually ended up being temporarily used in some capacity by at least the few consumers that Doppler had. By the time I left, the company had pivoted a bit towards like selling these headphones as hearing aids. So in the end, this model ended up being even more impactful because the goal, instead of just doing that for commuters or people using these headphones for fun, was very much to prevent excess feedback for users of this hearing aid. And so the idea was that a lot of hearing aid users will face substantial feedback in random environments just due to abnormalities in the environment. And this was a clear way to prevent that and make the experience much more comfortable.
Okay, yeah. I think it's also interesting, especially us as tech people. It's really like an achievement whenever we get to contribute to the population, and it's good, and like really be able to impact the world. So Hans?
So you just talk in the same in relation to projects still. Do you have a particularly favorite project that you've worked on in your say in Apple so far?
Let's see. I about specific projects really. So I don't know if that's a question I can really answer other than saying that I've really enjoyed working on the product that I contribute to, and definitely happy to discuss specifics with people one-on-one, but unfortunately probably not in a recorded setting.
Okay.
For sure.
Yeah.
Sorry.
For sure.
So actually, how do you decide to work on which project, or like, is it assigned to you? Do you choose?
Sure. I think a combination of both, at least within my group. there's a certain amount of every team has priorities. These priorities often have some influence from above in the hierarchy, but oftentimes the explicit objectives that the team is working on for a given quarter are set by the team together. So the team will sit down for a set of meetings at the beginning of every quarter and say, these are the goals that we have. These are the things we need to get done. The leads will spec out some initial things that they think need to get done. And everyone then has say if, this seems most important. Hey, this is actually something that I was thinking about that I think we should prioritize because it's going to have this customer impact, because it's going to contribute to this goal that we all commonly share. Or perhaps there's this goal that we need to modify because we know that there's some differing customer impact that we're looking to achieve. So I think in the end, technically, yes, everything's assigned because it sort of comes to you through consensus, but there's sort of say for everyone on the team every step along the way.
Okay. Okay, yeah. That's great to hear about the projects and how you prioritize it. Because some people don't know how to prioritize their projects, and it's really sometimes daunting to, or like very overwhelming with projects, working on projects. So Hans?
Yeah, speaking of projects and your prioritization of them, how do you make? What are important habits that you have or develop as a software engineer to be able to, be able to work as a software engineer and as well as prioritize your projects properly?
Sure. So I'll speak to the first in terms of being an effective software engineer. The also perspective of attempting to do software, do side projects. So with regards to the first, and there are a variety of things that are particularly important, and these vary in priority rank based on the environment you're in. So one of them is that you have this goal of ensuring quality of whatever you're outputting, and that you're reliably producing what you're proposing to produce. So I think what that means is from the very beginning, a goal should be to develop a consistent idea of how long different things take you to do, and
Mm-hmm.
make sure that that means that whenever you commit to doing something, you have a clear indication of, I'm committing to this because I know that it's going to take me this long, and I'll be able to actually get that done at the end of this time. So I think ensuring that you're consistent about that is a very important starting place. So that's one thing. Ensuring quality of the work that you output, which I guess I might have briefly mentioned there, is also super important. So, for example, with a lot of production code that you write, you want to ensure that you test it properly at every level. So ensuring that you apply, what you might cover in a software engineering class in college to that scenario is super important. So having effective unit testing, having effective integration testing and functional testing, and perhaps end-to-end testing depending on what you're working on. And of course, the importance of that varies depending on the what's the right way of saying this? The maturity of the project per se. So with an early stage project, perhaps a lot of this is less important, but ensuring that you keep that all in mind as you architect the project is super important. And I think the third thing is making sure that you have a clear idea of what you're setting out to do before you start doing it. And I think that's just as important with projects that you do in industry as it is for school projects, as it is for side projects. So what that means for us in industry is writing very clear design docs. And there's in fact a format that Amazon developed over the last 20 years or so called PRFAQ. That's one of the best possible ways to do this, where you start you start by writing a basic press release about what you're trying to accomplish, and then you go through a set of frequently asked questions about technical details for internal and external stakeholders in the project. And the default version that you can find online outlines some basic sorts of questions that should be answered most software projects within a production context. So starting out by answering all of those and that outlining the technical details that you know you need to finish to actually deliver is super important.
All right, that's a.
And then your second part of the question was about prioritizing projects.
Mhm. Like what?
Perhaps in the context of side projects, and I think that's entirely a personal endeavor. I don't really have any clear advice on that, other than the biggest thing you can do that you'll also want to do within work is make your work as granular as possible. So split it down to the smallest possible tasks, so that you know that when you sit down, even if you're only sitting down for an hour or two, hopefully you can finish something and have something to show for it. And as long as you split it down far enough, ideally you make iterative process over time. It can be very difficult when you're starting out projects, and it can be very difficult as you debug things or face issues along the way. But the more experience you build, the easier it is to do that, and the more important it is to do that.
All right, that's great to hear. Thank you for that. Hannah,
Okay.
what you got for us?
So we know that it's actually
Sorry.
really very difficult, or like a tasking job to be a software engineer. So have you ever experienced burnout while working in the tech industry? We know, yeah, it can be physically and mentally tiring. So how are you able to cope and get back on track?
Sure.
Recording is on.
I can start by answering that. I'm really lucky to have not directly encountered burnout yet within my first year out of school. But I think it's very easy to hit that point. I think one of the most important things to do is to have clear boundaries around work, which is something I'm not very good at doing. But much of my team speaks to this as well, where especially working home from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. And after 6 p.m., I'm just not going to think about work, and I'm not going to let it stress me out. Having those boundaries makes it much easier to prevent yourself from hitting a point where work is all you're thinking about, and you're much more likely to burn out. So setting time boundaries is one thing. I think another thing is having clear things that you care about and engage in outside of work. So for me, I've been training for a marathon with my dad, and that's been a big thing that's taken up a lot of time, but also sort of mental energy. And it's something I find really exciting. And as such, is something that's able to draw my mind away from work, if nothing else, for at least a part of my day regularly. And having things like that, hobbies that you can look to and say, this is something that I'm going to find happiness in, no matter whether or not work goes well or not, is much more likely to keep you stable in your experiences.
Yeah. I believe it's important to have different creative outlets as well, other than our profession, because yeah, it really gets tiring to think about it all the time.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, Han?
All right. All right. Let's take some questions from the crowd, from the audience. Oh, by the way, if anybody wants to ask some questions, please please chat it down there so we can read it for Akshay, or maybe he could read it himself. But then again, let's start with this. All right. First question is from Benedict Villamin. Can you describe a day in your life as an engineer, as a software engineer?
Sure. So whenever I answer this question, I say that it varies depending on the phase of a given project. So within our group, we follow the agile methodology, where we have sprints, and typically sprints compose of a series of different project phases that need to be completed. So initially, you'll have a week or so that's devoted to design, a few weeks that are devoted to implementation, and a week or so that are devoted to stabilization and release. So during the design period, you'll spend a lot of your time planning, reflecting on, writing design docs, as I mentioned, writing down ideas, sharing ideas, discussing ideas. So a lot of your time is spent writing and having conversations about that, and pitching ideas, presenting ideas, discussing ideas, trying to get an idea of exactly what you're going to do for the next few weeks of implementation. And ideally implementation, you'll likely still, so a day for us usually, pretty much every day of the week has a meeting that we'll have. So for example, we have stand up as part of the agile methodology twice a week, where we get together for 15 minutes as a team and just share what we're working on and if we're blocked on anything. And the idea then is that it's a clear place to go to ask for help if you need. And similarly, we have weekly planning meetings and debrief meetings. And in between, we might have design reviews and whatnot, or other conversations about projects that are going on. So those few weeks, ideally, you've already spec'd out exactly what you're doing. So you're spending all your time otherwise writing code, testing code, evaluating it, configuring your environments and your testing environments, everything that goes into that, analyzing data, building dashboards to present to your stakeholders, whether on your team. That's a lot of those 3 periods, or those 2 to 3 weeks in between, depending on the sprint cadence. And then the final part of stabilization release, for us at least, is focused entirely on sort of manual testing, picking up tech debt, so things that we knew we had to do along the way, but just didn't have time to, but are small tasks that need to get done, and then deploying all our services into production, managing communications with customers, so sending out release notes, all that. And so time there is largely spent doing those few things. And that's most of what time looks like, but it really depends on which part of this cycle we're in a given week.
Okay, all right, that's really nice to hear. All right, next question from Rachel T. Do you have any plans into moving your career to machine learning engineer or relating to that?
I'm definitely excited about moving in that direction. I don't know whether it's something I'm qualified to do, and I don't know any clear, direct ways to get there. So it's something I spend time thinking about and talking to people about. But really, in the end, at least within Apple, the biggest thing you can do to move in a particular direction is to deliver effectively and reliably within what you're currently doing, and then use that as a stepping stone into what you want to do next. So a lot of the focus has to be on the former, and certainly a lot of my focus goes there. I certainly spend time otherwise. A couple times a week, I'll go to reading groups where I get a chance to read papers about current innovations in machine learning, and use that as an opportunity to explore the space a bit more, and spend a bit of time on the side prototyping with. I've been playing around with the state-of-the-art GANs that people are using for facial manipulation. So that's something that's exciting, and trying to build enough knowledge that if someday I get the opportunity to move in the direction, I can leverage that to demonstrate that I know what I'm doing and actually do work effectively. But I don't really know the timeline or the clear direction on that yet.
Yeah. As software engineers, we know that you have to go through a lot of challenges every day. Amy has a question here. She's asking, what was the hardest thing you had to do in your job right now?
Sure. That's a difficult question. I don't really know if I have a clear answer to that. I think one of the hardest things for me, which has nothing to do with writing code, is dealing with negative feedback. So, gracefully and effectively taking feedback that says, you didn't do this right, you need to do it better next time, and making sure that I apply that regularly so that I can look back and say I did that better. I think that's been the hardest part of my experience so far.
Okay, yeah. So since we've mentioned that it is difficult to get into tech, what can you recommend to students who are interested in having a career on machine learning or like in tech in general? Because it can be daunting. So what is something you would tell them to push them to pursue this field?
For sure. So I can address machine learning first, and then tech in general. So machine learning first. I'd say these couple online courses that I mentioned are excellent starting places. They give you an idea of the kind of things that you can do, and then the most important thing to do is actually, sit down and work on projects. So there's an excellent site that some of you might have heard of called Kaggle that has cleaned data sets for different problems and clear problem statements that you can answer through various modeling techniques. So sitting down with one of those and just executing on it, designing a model, training a model, picking up a pre-trained model and just fine-tuning it on a given data set is an excellent way to start getting an idea of what actually goes into doing this in industry. And most importantly, then gives you stuff to talk about when you then interview for such a position. So definitely getting your hands dirty as much as possible is the most important thing. I think that piece of advice applies more generally to tech as a whole. Whether you're looking to be a software engineer or work in IT or as a product manager or in business development in tech, just getting your hands dirty is the most important thing. Working on side projects. I'm a big fan of hackathons. I went to all kinds of hackathons throughout college. Just opportunities to work on projects, collaborate with other people, think about new ideas. And that's the best thing you can do to prepare for a career in any of these directions.
All right, that's really great to hear. Matt Day over here has a question. How is the application process in getting a job in Apple?
For sure. So Apple has a separate recruiting process for every group/team. So this really varies team to team and function to function. I can speak a bit about the interview process. My group, ML Platform and Technology, which is that most people are interviewed for sort of a hybrid of software engineering and machine learning. So you're expected to perform well on typical algorithms questions, as many of you might have seen on LeetCode or interviewing with any other big tech company. And then another part is answering machine learning questions. And there's certainly opportunities within MLPT that don't require having deep expertise in this, such as my position. I went through this interview process, but am not, as I mentioned, not qualified for an ML engineering position, so am not in that direction. But for example, you might be asked case questions about, given this particular scenario, how would you think about architecting a machine learning implementation from scratch? So how would you go about collecting data for a particular problem? How would you define the problem in a way that can be addressed? How would you think about, preparing that data, modeling the data, and that's a situation. And then, of course, answering all kinds of questions about experience with machine learning, your knowledge about the mathematical foundations of deep learning in our particular context, but certainly all sorts of machine learning, ability to choose between different modeling techniques for different problems, so on. I think overall, Apple emphasizes comparatively, especially compared to other big tech companies, prior experience in interviews. So especially for industry hires, there is comparatively less emphasis on algorithm interviews and more emphasis on ability to discuss your past experience and why you want to join the team that you're interviewing with. And so even at the new grad level, for example, or the intern level, having clear answers for those questions is useful.
Okay, that's great to hear. All right, next question we have from Amruthi Gujar. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. What are the major challenges you anticipate the software industry will need to overcome in the coming decade? With all the COVID situation and all.
Sure. I'm not sure that I have much of an answer to that towards the COVID situation, but in general, in the coming decade, I think one of the biggest things is constraints to compute resources. So, especially in the space of machine learning, there's tons of exciting work being done to achieve better generalization and to some degree in computer vision with massive modeling endeavors. So with enormous models that require big GPUs to perform inference, but especially require thousands of GPUs for months at a time to train. So I think actually figuring out how to take the learnings from those techniques and apply them for general use is going to be one of the biggest problems that we'll have to figure out in the coming decade, because there's so much innovation happening at the fringe, but actually mapping fringe innovation to production deployment is incredibly difficult.
Okay,
All right.
Um,
It's cool.
okay,
Go
sorry.
ahead, go. Sorry.
Okay. David Wong here. He's asking, "Hi Akshay, do you have any tips for people who has no knowledge in machine learning? Where to begin and where to learn? Perhaps you have some resources you can share."
For sure. As I mentioned earlier, I think Andrew Ng's machine learning course on Coursera is an excellent place to start. There's a great book that I came across recently that I recommended to someone. A book by forget his name. He's a scientist at Gartner, a Russian guy. It's a very quick read that goes over sort of high level approaches to modeling techniques relatively technically. So I think both of those are excellent starting places. And then identifying the specific sorts of problems that you want to work on, you can find much more specific resources there, whether online course materials from MIT or Stanford, which publicize a lot of the materials, or research papers, or like textbooks in specific areas.
Okay. So speaking of like work, how do you balance work and life during COVID?
For sure. As I mentioned earlier, when I talked about generally avoiding burnout, I think the biggest thing is to have cutoff points in your day. As I mentioned, I haven't done a very good job of this, but I'm always trying to get better at that. So saying that, you know, I always tomorrow. So prioritizing my day so I finish the things that I need to get done as quickly as possible, and make sure that then the things that might be taking up time after say 6 p.m. are things that usually I can move to the next day if they're actually high priority enough to actually do. I think in the end, this piece like that approach applies just as well for general work that you do, even outside of these times.
All right. That's cool. That's cool. All right. Ask questions from the audience. I think. And this. Oh, I'm gonna make that too. From Ali Ma. How do you balance work and life during COVID? Since you did say that you had a difficulty to balance that back then, like work and life. How do you do it now?
Yeah, I think that was exactly
Let's
my
see.
answer. Yeah,
All right. All right. So, I guess last question from the audience, unless somebody wants to follow up. What is the culture in Apple?
for sure. Yeah, I think a lot of it was what I mentioned earlier about um, the companies is a functional organization, excellence in the things that we all do. Um, I would also say, otherwise, eh, Apple as a whole is pretty different team to team. But one of the things that sort of unifies all of it is the mission of the company, which is to produce very high quality products that surprise and delight users. And so everyone wants to achieve that goal for the company and wants to make sure that we do everything we can to achieve that goal. Um, so I think everything's sort of focused around that. I don't know if there's really other unified culture across the company.
All right. All right. All right. Hannah, what do you
Okay.
got?
So for now, there are no other questions from the audience, but if you do have, please message or you can open your mic to ask Akshay directly. So, how do you think? How different do you think were your expectations from reality when you started off in the tech industry?
Sure. Is there a particular context for this question? I'm not super sure how to answer that.
Like expect expectations like life would be great, software engineer, that um like some things you expected that didn't really turn out to be that way, I guess.
Sure. Huh. Okay. Um, let's see. I think one of the things that has continued to surprise me, which is really a good thing, is um, at least within Apple, there's so there. I mentioned earlier that there's still a fair amount of at every level. There's some idea from the top down of what needs to get done. But there's often more trust than I expected that any given person can one-off define what they need to do and then figure out the execution plan to finish it. And so I think the thing that continues to surprise me is just how much independence is sort of given, even if there's tons of support available. And that's the biggest thing that I've been surprised by.
Yeah. So, what were what do you think are some things, or like, what's the important thing you learned while working in Apple or in the tech industry as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, I think the stuff I mentioned earlier about quality and independence and reliability is the biggest thing. One component of that is I know I mentioned some of the stuff that you might have covered in a software engineering class in undergrad. Um, I interned at Facebook as an undergrad and had been quite surprised there, quite how much of what was covered in that class ended up being super important. So understanding design patterns, especially as they apply to very common engineering paradigms. For example, compilers is super important because everyone sort of has that shared knowledge and applies the shared knowledge in everything. How engineering that a big thing I've learned is just how much is academically rooted in all of the work we do as relates to those particular disciplines.
Yeah. Because people usually say that the things you learn in school are just a small portion of what you actually use at work. So I think it's important as well because those are the foundations, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's the foundations, but I think it's definitely important to remember that like even though it's a small part of what we learn, it's a very important part. So keeping all of that, you know, close to your heart and uh, you know, easily accessible in terms of knowledge that you can apply is very important.
Mhm.
I don't know if many people agree with me that I know I certainly feel.
Okay. Um, so yeah, we've been talking about challenges and really hardships. So if you had anything to say to yourself when you were starting out in your career as a software engineer, what would it be?
Yeah. Um, I think the biggest thing is uh, I don't think I quite realized this idea early in my like you know I'm still very early in my career, but when I first started at Apple, that um, when things go wrong, it's usually not entirely your fault. So what that means is that when things go wrong, so when things don't go as expected, the most important thing you can do is to be transparent and clear in your communication about it. And if you do that, then you're most able to avoid spending more time than you should on things that don't go well or like don't turn out as expected. So I think that's one big thing that I would tell myself is um, don't be afraid to be transparent. There's like almost all the time it'll work out in your benefit.
Okay. Can you actually share about like any tips you can share on communicating with errors or like communicating with your team as well? Because it can really be you can get nervous with doing that because you people are scared to take the blame. So what is something you can tell them to really be open to the team?
Thing is, this obviously is somewhat reliant on team culture being good in the first place, which I'm very lucky to have found on my team. But no one on your team is out to get you. And I think if you assume that at the very beginning, then hopefully, even if that perhaps is wrong, it ends up becoming the case. And so, um, having that initial belief, especially early in your career, is super important, in my opinion. Um, think it's easy to become very competitive, easy to like try to undermine other people, but knowing that other people are there to support you is the first step to then you know communicating, communicating transparently. I think part of that is also that everyone accepts that there's maturity in not communicating about certain things, asking for help too much, per se. But given that, there's also a lot of flexibility to do so early on. And as long as you learn from every question you ask and every piece of progress that you make, then you avoid being more reliant on those modes of communication in the future.
Okay. Those tips are actually great, and we'll keep that in mind. I hope the audience wants to hand.
I guess this is one last question from the audience. Would it be okay to connect with you on LinkedIn?
Yeah, absolutely. If any of you do, please mention in the connection request note that you're connecting after watching this. That would be much appreciated.
Is it all right if you put it on chat, your profile, please? It's fine.
Absolutely.
Can I ask you a question?
Okay, go ahead.
You got a quick. You can ask.
Yeah, thank you. Akshay, thank you so much for that. Was really, really insightful. I'm one of the co-founders of Fiesta of this app. So thank you so much for being on here. Obviously, sort of given your experience and everything that you do, and sort of everything that you're doing in machine learning. Just curious about kind of like your thoughts on Fiesta. It's a little bit of kind of what you see, where you have a list of all the different events, where the video conferencing is built in with like social media elements. So a little bit of like if you combine like Eventbrite with Zoom with like Instagram, TikTok elements into one app. Where people can just kind of like hop in and out of sort of different events, and for the host, it's easy to create the events. What are your thoughts on kind of like the app, and then is there one or two things that you'd be like, oh, it's cool, but if it had this or this feature, it'd be so much better.
Definitely. I'm a big fan so far. I actually when I was invited to join for this, I ended up signing up for our so it's been exciting to see that. I'm excited to continue using the app. One thing is, I unfortunately can't see the screen right now. So I've gotten right now. I opened the chat window and I can't get out of the chat window. So there we go. Finally made it out. But definitely that's one challenge I've encountered. But otherwise, I think the design's been excellent. So fantastic job with it. I think the combination of all the different things that we're using. So it's a more well integrated version of like you can associate Facebook rooms or Zoom events with Facebook events, but they're not all in one thing. So this is all of that together in one place, which I think is really cool. I don't know yet if you guys have calendar integration. I didn't see if that is present, but I know that that's something that I heavily use. All the it's fantastic. Hopefully, as I continue using it, there are more events that I see that are exciting, and perhaps I can host some of my own as well.
Yeah, certainly. And thank you so much again. I think one of the things, because it's pulling like the audio and video from so many different people and so many, obviously it always works better when people are using it from their home, like with the Wi-Fi. I know in this case you were using it from your car. So I think there's a few times the audio cut in and out a little bit. So we'll still obviously we're always doing sort of optimization, but the audio there always works better when people are connected to a sort of like a Wi-Fi.
My apologies on that. I saw that you have a low bandwidth mode, so perhaps I should have enabled that.
No, but again, thank you so much. Just one more question, and I know because you talked a lot about sort of your time at Apple, but I was just looking at your LinkedIn, and I see you were co-founder of a blockchain society. and you were kind of doing sort of that at a part time. Was that a little bit of a kind of like startup? What, like, can you just, I don't know if you could share a little bit about kind of like sort of that experience and how, sort of what kind of sort of involvement what you worked on that kind of, I would assume that was a little bit of a startup.
Definitely, yeah. So Blockchain Society wasn't so much a direct startup. It started as a student club at UW, where I was doing my degree.
Okay.
And we ended up founding a nonprofit spun out from that was focused on a few different things in the Seattle area. So the big thing was that we were organizing this annual conference where we bring, we had about 400 attendees the first year during my senior year in college when we first hosted it, to just talk about blockchain. So we had professors and entrepreneurs and researchers that flew in from all over the country to come speak about their work and continue developing some of it with other people in the community. And so a lot of the work that we did was sort of advancing that. So we would host events, and then we started running a few projects. So I myself ended up working on, it was mostly for the sake of providing like development experience to the people in our communities. So we built a file hyperledger framework and a few other things like that, just for the sake of like building experience with these platforms within our communities. So it was a nonprofit focused entirely on advocacy of blockchain.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay. So does anyone else from the audience have any questions for Akshay? You can actually speak or turn on your video, or you can chat it. Okay. Okay, so I don't think there are any questions left.
No worries.
Let's go to the concluding. Okay, so for the concluding questions, what do you know now that you wish you knew when you started your career?
I think the biggest thing is exactly what I mentioned. Have trust in people. People might be out to get you at some point, but your teammates are there to support you.
Okay, yeah. Really, connections and communication is really important as well in the tech industry, and not many people realize that. So what do you think you need to learn, or what do you want to learn? Can be more about software engineering, machine learning, or anything really that interests you.
Yeah, I think one of the things that really interests me is better methods of knowledge on this data platform. And one of the exciting next steps there, in my mind, that I have no clue if it's a focus for the team, but it's something I'm personally excited about, is figuring out if there are better ways to process and represent data for use in different modeling techniques, generally across all sorts of different tasks. And if there's a way that we can map that to all sorts of data that we can collect. So that's generally something I'm looking to learn more about. It's a very open area, has overlap with various areas of knowledge graph research and information retrieval and extraction and representation. So looking to learn a bit from each of these different spaces to apply to that problem.
Okay, yeah, really something to look forward to, no? Okay, Han?
Mm-hmm. All right, and if you were in our position, what question would you have asked yourself?
That's a good question. I think you guys asked excellent questions. I don't really know that there's much else related to this journey and career that I would have asked. I think one thing that I'm always interested in hearing and would certainly be interested in hearing from other people that you interview is what different people see as the best ways to give back to their communities. I know that You guys are certainly doing this in an excellent way by interviewing all kinds of people and getting that information out. But would also be interested in learning from you if there are other things that you think are most useful.
All right. So yeah, that's about it. If anybody else has any more last minute questions, we're still entertaining them. Well, Ashley's still here. Anyone? I guess that's it. All right, so that concludes today's episode. Thank you, Ashley, for coming to the
Thank you.
episode.
Thank you so much for
Once
having me.
again, I'm Hans. This is Hannah, and thank you again for coming. It's been a pleasure. All right, thank you. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, Ashley. Take care.
Thank you. Bye. Take care.
Bye. Take care, guys. Oh my God.